Welcome, I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from around the world. Now, today, all of us should be aware in the United States that this is Veterans Day, a day that actually also honors the end of World War I back in 1918. But we continue to honor all our veterans on this date. And we want to honor all those who have served in the armed forces. Tonight, we especially want to remember and honor the faith and valor and service of the most decorated military chaplain in U.S. history, and that was Father Emile Capon. He was a veteran chaplain of World War II. He served in the Burma Theater in Asia. And then, several years later, he was in the Korean War as a chaplain. And it was his valor and bravery in that conflict that would earn him the Medal of Honor. In 1993, he was further declared something even greater. He was a servant of God, decreed so by Pope St. John Paul II. Tonight, we have someone to share a bit more about this U.S. Army chaplain and servant of God, Father Emile Capon. So please welcome Mr. Scott Carter. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Father.
Good to have you here. And a lot of times we have to do our programs via Skype because of the COVID situation, but so it's nice to have you here in the studio with us tonight.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Now, why are you here? Why did they send you to talk about Father Capon?
Well, I have the privilege of working for his cause and being the coordinator of the cause, as well as Capon's Men, which is a group of men that seek to imitate his example. And honestly, it's a great privilege, I think, to be here. I was in the right place at the right time, knew a couple people who recommended me for the position when it was open. My boss is Father John Hotze, who's the Episcopal delegate for the cause. So he's the one who really did all the investigation and paperwork that went over to Rome. And
yes.
So I get to handle a lot of the day-to-day stuff and connect with people who are interested in his story. And I mean, it's such a compelling story that I think sure. That part of the job is easy for me because everyone loves hearing it. So
well, we had Father Hotze on this program way back in 2012. So it's nice to have you here. And one of the things I think that would be most appropriate at this point is for you to tell us a little bit more about Father Capon. Now, do you say Capon or Capon?
Well, that's the biggest question we get, honestly, and forgive me when I slip back and forth because he was both. He was primarily Czech, had some German in the family, and then when you throw that, immigrating into America into the mix,
so
it kind
I'm
of
going to stick with
things.
the German pronunciation because they probably were from Sudetenland, that section of Czechoslovakia,
right.
When there used to be a Czechoslovakia that was actually inhabited by a lot of Germans, and there was a lot of mixture.
Absolutely,
that part of Europe, a lot of part of the Austrian Empire when his people came over to America, and so there was a lot of back and forth. So tell us a bit more about Father Capon.
Sure, yeah. So he grew up on a farm, a small farming community in Pilsen, Kansas, named after the Pilsen in the Czech Republic, but much smaller. It's about an hour north of Wichita, and a great faith-based community, hard workers, and very resourceful. And so he grew up in that atmosphere and was fairly normal, all things considered, loved to hunt, loved to fish. He always was looking out to help others from an early age, both at school and then he would ride his bike to Mass to serve for Mass for his priest often and all that sort of stuff. And when he got older, he was really attracted to the missionary life. He wanted to bring the good news to foreign lands, but he ended up becoming a diocesan priest. And I think that missionary spirit still stuck with him. And when World War II broke out, he was interested in becoming a chaplain, and finally convinced the bishop to allow him to enter the chaplain corps. And I think that's how he lived out his missionary spirit.
Sure, sure. And we mentioned how he served in Burma. A lot of people don't even know about Burma anymore because the name has been changed. But Burma was a very important part of World War II because the Empire of Japan had taken Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, all that. And it was a big risk that they would go all the way to British India. So that was a big deal in those days. And there was some difficult fighting in that part of the war.
Yeah, absolutely. He arrived a little bit late there. It was already, I think, 1945, so shortly before the war ended over in Europe, and then later that August in Japan. But he had to travel, through the jungles to visit the troops. He would travel thousands of miles either by air or by jeep over these dangerous mountain roads. Yeah. And he said his guardian angel got a big thanks a couple times because it protected him from danger and accidents. But he would, love just traveling all over to be with the men.
Sure, sure. A lot of folks might remember the bridge over the River Kwai. I believe that goes through Burma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the parts of that war that got to be in the media. So he served there, and then the war ended in 45, of course, and then we got back into another crisis in Korea when the North Koreans tried to invade South Korea. And that got us involved in trying to stop them from doing that. The North Koreans, of course, being then and still today communist and allies of communist China. So when did he get over to Korea?
Yeah, so when the war ended, the bishop actually asked him to study education at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and he did that, came back and served in the diocese, but the Army put out a call for more chaplains, and so he wanted to answer the call. So he was actually serving again towards the end of 1948 down in Fort Bliss, Texas, mm-hmm. and then was sent over to the 1st Cavalry Division in Japan. Mm-hmm. So he was part of the occupying force, but they were training for war. And so when the war broke out, he was one of the first troops to be sent over. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because even back before or during World War II, he was talking to his brother, Eugene, who was several years younger than him. And Eugene asked him about the situation in the world, and he said, yes, Hitler's very evil, and Tojo in Japan is a very big evil that we'll have to face, and it'll be difficult. But I think that we can overcome those. But communism is the one that's going to be the real challenge, and that's eventually what ended up leading to his death.
Yeah, it's a lot of times, we emphasize how somebody is a Nazi. People use that as an insult very lightly, and partly because they think of the evil Hitler did, and it was nothing but evil in all the killing. But Hitler killed 10 million people in concentration camps, and I don't know the number in the Empire of Japan. I was very higher yet. But then the communists way outkilled them. I mean, the number of people killed by the communists was, Soviet Union was 61.9 million. And that's huge.
Scary,
yeah. And China was 90 million, 75 to 90 million. Yeah. It's horrendous and still climbing. They're still doing it. So they were right. This was...
Yeah, and I think a lot of the men who were fighting in the war didn't really understand what they were fighting for. But for Father Capon, he wasn't only fighting for his soldiers. He was fighting to keep the people free. And he said, he was there again from the very beginning, and it was a very rough start. The North Koreans almost pushed the U.S. and United Nations forces off the peninsula. They eventually got enough reinforcements and were able to move back north. And he said when they were retaking the towns, it was just beautiful to see the people come out and welcome them their freedom. They had been captives maybe for a few months, but the devastation was horrible. But you know, he was happy to be there fighting for a free people as well. And you know, and he quickly gained a notoriety among his troops for sure, as being a chaplain who would be willing to risk his life to save them. And he would visit them on the front lines, maybe bring some apples or a drink of water, and just to cheer them up. And you can imagine the 18, 19-year-old private halfway across the world in a country that he doesn't even know where it is on the map, out there risking his life, and here comes a chaplain who's willing to put his own life on the line just to cheer him up, just to pray with him. You know how important that made that person feel. And he didn't stop there. When the fighting was going, he would go out and find the men there too. And even early on in the war, he was awarded the Bronze Star for one incident where there was a squad leader who was wounded. He ordered the rest of his squad to leave him there so that they wouldn't get shot as well. And when Father Capon found out, he didn't wait for the litter bearers or the medics to go get him. He and his assistant grabbed a stretcher and went off under machine gun fire, small arms fire, and were able to bring this man back. And some of the soldiers said that after that, it really gave them a boost because they didn't really know what to expect. They were having trouble staying out on the front lines. And when they realized that, okay, we've got a chaplain, we've got a team who are going to come get us if we get in trouble, like we can stand and fight. And so it really helped boost the morale of the men who were there.
And he won that Bronze Star for, you know, bravery under fire in 3 weeks of the beginning of the fighting.
Yeah.
And he'd only been there for 3 weeks, and he already won that Bronze Star. That's really extraordinary. But he, you know, did that, and again showed this kind of care, a priestly care for these soldiers, and a fatherly care. You know, that's one of the reasons I think they call us fathers. That's what we're supposed to do. Is
Absolutely.
be there for these guys.
Yeah, he thought of them as his boys. You know, he was about 34, 35 at the time, and they were obviously somewhat younger, even the officers. And so to them, that was his family.
Yeah. In fact, we have a picture of his unit that was taken just before the Battle of Unsan and his capture. So those are some of the guys that he was with, and this was not, you know, the kind of thing that was, you know, big marching bands and bright uniforms. This was hard slugging through, and then not long after that, a week later after that photograph, he was captured by the North Koreans.
Yeah, it was. The war was. A lot of people thought the war was over, and MacArthur thought the war was over, who was in charge, and a lot of the officers. And the rumor was that they'd be home by Thanksgiving. And after recapturing Seoul, they kind of waited on the border, and then MacArthur said, okay, let's go ahead and end this for good, and we're going to go into North Korea, pursue them up to the border with China, and we'll all be home. And the North Korean army was pretty devastated, but what MacArthur and some of the others failed to recognize was that China was ready to defend their turf and defend that buffer country. And so they had snuck a lot of troops in. And it was 70 years ago, just a week ago with All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, when the Battle of Unsan took place. And Father Capon's unit, he was with the 8th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division. They were kind of the tip of the spear going north, along with another South Korean unit. And so they were basically ambushed by the Chinese, and he celebrated 3 or 4 masses on All Saints' Day, was able to go around to the men, but that was the last masses that he was able to celebrate. And the first 2 battalions were ordered to retreat early on in the night because they had taken some fire and were realizing, okay, we're kind of out here on a limb. But the 3rd battalion that he was with was ordered to cover the retreat, and they didn't have time to escape. So it was about 10,000 to 20,000 Chinese attacking probably 800 men. And it was kind of eerie as the battle began. It was dark. There was a bit of snow on the ground. They were surrounded by mountains. They were down in the valley because they didn't really expect an attack. And the men who survived said they heard these sheep horns. They were the horns of sheep used as bugles that the Chinese used to communicate the attack. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose, and machine guns, mortars, everything, started firing, and they were in for the fight of their lives. About 200 men made it out of the 800. I think about 300 died, were killed in action there, and 300 were taken prisoner. But Father Capon had a chance to escape, but he stayed there to help the men. He said, "This is where my boys need me." And all throughout the night, all throughout the morning, the battle, he was everywhere on the battlefield. They said he was praying with the men, putting in a good word, saying an act of contrition with them, absolution, anointing of the sick. But he was also out there pulling back the wounded, pulling back those who were still alive into the safety of this dugout. All the while, Chinese are just everywhere. At one point, he actually gets captured by the Chinese during the battle, and some of the U.S. soldiers were able to notice and fire at the Chinese, and he slipped away, but he went straight back to helping the wounded. Mm-hmm. And as daybreak, the Chinese took a little break. They like to attack at night, and the men said, "Father, you've got to get out of here. You got to try and make a way out." And he said, "No, my place is with the wounded." And so all that day, he tried to save more wounded men despite sniper fire. And he ended up eventually pulling about 40 men into the safety of this dugout. There was also a medical doctor who stayed with him, Captain Anderson, and the two of them were there. And as night fell, the Chinese came back again, and they were outside of the perimeter, and so they were captured. And he actually had to negotiate the capture because the Chinese were throwing grenades down there, but he noticed that one of the wounded in there was a Chinese officer that he had pulled in, and he convinced them to take their surrender, saving the lives of those men. And then, after the battle kind of died down is perhaps the famous story that a lot of people have heard of him rescuing Herb Miller from the ditch, who was about to be shot by a Chinese soldier. And he just walks over and pushes the gun out of the way and picks Herb up and says, "Come on, let's go."
We have a clip about that. Let's take a look at that clip. Herbert Miller had been wounded. He was a sergeant, first class. He had been very seriously wounded by a grenade, wounded his leg at the Battle of Unsan, and Father Capon saved him. So take a look at this clip, please.
There was dead Koreans and Chinese there, so where I was laying, I pulled one of them over me. So I laid down there, and I had my arm up like this, and I could see that Korean's boot right there, but he didn't know I was alive. So pretty quick they took off. The Americans chased them out of there, and I just laid there till about, I guess, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or so. And I looked up a ditch, and here was a Chinese officer and a Korean. And the Korean saw that I was alive, so he come down there.
Finally, this Chinese soldier realizes that he's still alive, pulls the bodies off of him, and puts the rifle to Miller's forehead. And there was no hope.
And he stood over me with a gun pointed it right at my head. And I figured to myself, well, this is the end of the road right here. And about that time, I saw this soldier coming from across the road there.
Father had already surrendered and was under guard and saw this execution about to take place. So he walked away from his own guards who could have shot him. He just walked away.
He come right straight to where I was, pushed that guy aside. Why that guy never shot him, I'll never know. The Lord must have healed him, because he bent over and picked me up and carried me.
He said, I don't have any idea how he was able to pick me up, but he said he picked me up, and he said he started to carry me.
And I hopped along on one leg, and him with his arm around me. And I found out then that he was a chaplain, and that it was Father Capon. I didn't know who he was, because his helmet was all dirty, and you couldn't see the cross on it. And when it got dark, he routed us out of there and made us start walking. And Father Capon was hanging on to me, helping me along. Sometimes he'd carry me. Sometimes he'd put his arm around me, helping me hop on one leg. Because I didn't have a shoe on my wounded leg, and it was all open. There was no bandage or anything. And that's the way we went from there to prison camp. It was a long journey. But without him, I'd have never made it. God sent that man to me. I know just as well as I was born, if the Lord sent him and he obeyed what the Lord told him, to come straight across there where I was at, there's no other reason, none. Because he could have just well left and went the other way. So I give the Lord all the credit for saving my life, and he obeyed what the Lord told him to do. You'll never find another man like him, not on this side of heaven.
Now, they were forced to march 87 miles from the battleground over to a prison camp, and that's where they were going to be held. What happened next?
Yeah, so along the way, obviously, if you couldn't make it, the Chinese and North Koreans didn't really care about you, and they would, if you fell behind, you'd hear a gunshot, and that'd be the last you saw of the person. Right. And so, yeah, Father Capon obviously helped Herb Miller and many of the other men make it there, and encouraged the other men to carry him. And I think once they got to the prison camp, they were kind of hoping that things would get better, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. The first 4 or 5 months, the North Koreans were in charge of the camp, and I think their philosophy was, well, the less people that make it, that's one less mouth that we have to feed. And they really just kind of let them go. The food was scarce, medicine was non-existent, and so the men had to fend for themselves. And it was actually the coldest winter that they had had on record, with temps down to -30, -40 degrees. And so the men were in their summer uniforms. They thought the war was going to be over, and so they hadn't received all their winter uniforms yet. And so it was just a brutal place. And the picture there is the Pyeongtaung prison camp. It was an old, it was a town that was repurposed. I think the villagers lived kind of up towards the east part of town there that you can't see. That picture's in the summer, but you can just imagine that ice over the water and snow everywhere. And unfortunately, when February rolled around, March, sometimes men were dying at a rate of 24 a day, and I think about 40 to 45% didn't make it. And so Father Capon, he knew something had to be done, and he insisted that the men think that they were going to make it out. And he supported them in all ways, not just by giving a good word or praying with them. He was down and dirty doing charitable deeds to look after them. And some of the most amazing things to me that I can think of that he did, the men had lice that were all over their clothes and bodies, and they would actually take a little bit of blood. And for the men who were sick, starvation diet, and wounded, it was enough to kill some of them in a few days. And so sure. He would go and pick the lice off their bodies one by one, and they would actually make a little bit of a game out of it, say, oh, I got 60 today, how about you? And I got 70 and everything. And then to help their dignity, he would wash their clothing, their dirty clothing. A lot of the men had dysentery or other diseases where they couldn't control their bowels, and obviously they could lead to more disease. And Father Capon, even in the dead of winter, he would go out and break through the ice, wash their clothes. He would melt snow in pots to wash their clothes and bathe them. And it just, to me, like, that's love. That's amazing what he would do. And he would steal food for the men as well. He would share his own food. Towards the end, he was giving away so much food that might have been, one of the causes that contributed to his death. But you know, he insisted on keeping their spirits alive, and because he was taking care of their bodies, they would listen to him too when he cared for their souls. And at night he would open the door just a crack and peek out, make sure there weren't any guards, and he would kind of slink over to the hut next to him and pop in. He'd ask the men how they were doing, if there was anything that he could provide or anything that he should let the doctor know, and then he would offer to pray with them. And he'd say an Our Father. They would pray for their families back home. They would pray in thanksgiving for everything that they had been given, even though it was very little. And they would pray that their captors be freed from their ideology that was leading them to do this. And then the men say, you know, they'd see the silhouette of him make the sign of the cross, and then he'd crack the door open and look out and go around the whole camp as much as possible. He couldn't make it everywhere, but he made it a lot of places to pray with the men.
And again, that was high risk, because if the guards did catch him, they'd shoot him.
Yeah, absolutely. The guards realized the influence he had on the men, and I think they wanted to get rid of him, but they were afraid to. They were afraid of a riot if they did something to him outright. And they would have indoctrination sessions and try and convince the men that capitalism was evil, America is bad, that their families had forgotten them, and that they should come and live there, you know, in China and embrace communism. And Father Capon would stand up and very calmly refute their statements, their arguments, simple things. They would say, where is your God? Why is he not helping you? And he would say, well, how about the air? Do you see the air that you breathe? Do you feel it, you know? And he said, our God is like that. We know he's with us because we're still alive, we're still here. And it would just enrage the communists. And they would be up there shouting and screaming, and he'd just be talking calmly and politely. And the men appreciated that. They knew that, hey, if our chaplain's standing up to them, you know, we're going to be okay. We're not going to give in. We're going to fight for what we believe. And you know, our freedom, our faith, our liberty that we believe is a gift from God. And so yeah, the communists were looking to get rid of him. One of the most remarkable events that happened in the prison camp happened on Easter, 1951. And it was a gray morning, just like the rest. They said pretty much all the days in the prison camp were gray to them. But Father Capon insisted that they were going to have a proper service. The communists wouldn't let him have any official services, but he said, I'm just going to do it this time. And so he told all the officers in their compound to meet up at the steps of this bombed out church. And so they all walked up there in this solemn procession. They sat on the steps, and he was down kind of at their feet like an amphitheater. And he started not with the resurrection, but he started with the Stations of the Cross, because he wanted to remind the men that everything that they were suffering was something that Christ went through too.
Sure.
That he was suffering with them. And then he led them through the prayers of the Easter service. He couldn't celebrate Mass because he didn't have bread or wine for 7 months, and that devastated him. But he still wanted to give him that hope. And they prayed the Rosary, the Glorious Mysteries. They sang a beautiful rendition of the Our Father, and as well as the Star Spangled Banner and God Save the Queen, because there were British soldiers there as well. And he told the officers, to sing loud enough that the enlisted men, who were in a separate compound and were fenced off from them, could hear. And they said that the sound of that praise filled the camp that morning, and everyone knew it was Easter and had hope.
Yeah, it was remarkable. We're going to take a little break. You can find out more about Father Capon by just going to fathercapon.org. And Father is spelled out. Capon is KAPAUN.org. You can also go to this organization called Capon's Men. This is KAPAUNS men.com, and find out more what they are doing as lifting up this great example of a good priest and a good man who was filled with God's love, and trying to live that out in our own circumstance. We'll be back in a couple of minutes, so please stay with us. We have a number of things available for you to learn more about Father Capon. If you go to EWTNRC.com, you can get a book called The Miracle of Father Capon, Priest, Soldier, and Korean War Hero. This was written by Roy Wenzel and Travis Hain. And if you go to EWTNRC.com, you can find it there. It's item number 40653. So that would be a good thing. And we also have some documentaries that you can look up. So just look up Father Capon at the EWTN Religious Catalog and get a lot more information about him. God willing, he'll be yet one more American saint. Now, how did Father Capon die?
So shortly after the Easter service, his health really took a turn for the worse, and he had a blood clot in his leg. He had gotten pneumonia, obviously was starving, and honestly, some of the men don't even know when he slept. He was doing so much work. And he had gotten sick, was kind of on his back for 5 or 6 weeks, and then started to come out of it a little bit and get just slightly better, so that the men thought that there was real hope that he could make it, and the weather was warming up. And it was at that point when the Chinese communists who were taking control of the camp saw their opportunity, and they came into the hut that he was staying in and said, all right, it's time, he goes. And they were going to take him to what they called the hospital. The rest of the men in the camp called it the death house because hardly anyone ever came back alive.
Right.
And so the men were about ready to put up a fight to save their chaplain. They were willing to risk their lives for the one who risked his life for them. And he spoke up over the den and said, calm down, guys. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. And he told the men to keep on. He told one of the men, Ralph Nardella, to keep leading the prayers because he was Catholic, knew the prayers. He told the other men to keep looking for the food for the men to provide. One of the men, Mike Dow, who's good friends with them, was sobbing, and he said, Mike, don't worry about me. I'm going where I always wanted to go. And he said, when I get there, I'll be praying for all of you. And so, that's how he died. And the men insisted that they be the ones to carry him up to the death house, and they did. And they were astonished that along the way, whenever he passed a guard or a commandant of the camp, he would have them pause. And even if they couldn't understand, although a lot of them did because a lot of the officers spoke English, he would ask for their forgiveness. And then he said, please forgive me if I have done anything wrong to you. And he said, and Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing.
Oof.
And and you can imagine, I mean, this wasn't only attacks against him, this was attacks against the men he served and the men he loved.
Sure.
And so, but he went forgiving his enemies just like Christ did. And he was only up in the hospital for a couple days before he passed away, and word got back to the rest of the camp. And they were sad, but they also realized, like, well, he's not suffering and he's looking after us. And it was another 2.5 years before those men were freed. But conditions got a little bit better for them. It was still pretty bad. But the first thing that they did, those who knew him well, when they got out, was tell his story. And that's really where his cause comes from is yes, he was heroic on the battlefields, and we knew about that, but man, what he did in the prison camp to serve his men, to be a beacon of hope and faith and love, that's where the word got out and started going. But it wasn't until, like you said, 1993 that the cause was officially opened. The Archdiocese, the military services, the Diocese of Wichita took it over in the 2000s, and we compiled all the documents and investigations and interviews and everything you can possibly imagine on Father Capon and sent it over to Rome. And that was summarized in the Positio, which is 1,100 pages, the statement about his life and heroic virtue. And that's gone through a couple of the committees over at the Congregation for Saints, and we're hoping that soon, maybe when things open back up over there fully, that they'll be able to review it and hopefully make a recommendation to the Holy Father that he be named Venerable, and then maybe on to Blessed with a couple of the potential miracles that we have.
Well, one sign of the great respect the soldiers had for him is that a Jewish prisoner made a crucifix and carried it out of the camp when it was liberated.
Yeah.
And that, he didn't share our Christian faith, but he had so much respect that he made that kind a crucifix for them to bring out of the camp, and it was in honor of Father Capon.
Yeah.
We have a caller on the line. Hello, Brad.
Yes,
Hi.
Father.
Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from St. Petersburg, Florida. We're in the middle of a tropical storm. And
bless you.
Brad Jenkins, my wife, Pat, we know Scott. We've helped him with the canonization process through a letter. But I'd like to, and Scott has heard this, but I want the viewers to hear this. I'm a Vietnam combat veteran. I suffered from PTSD, and I had one heck of a time forgiving the VC for what they did. I prayed to Father Capon. I prayed very hard, intercessory prayer. He relieved me of that hurt, and I have forgiven the VC for their atrocities, and I've gotten on with my life very successfully. And I just want to say that Father Capon, who saved hundreds of POW in that camp, is certainly a saint and should be one.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Father. Scott,
Thank you
keep
very
up the good
much.
work.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. It is really inspiring. I mean, for me, sometimes the cause takes a little while. It doesn't move as quickly as we would like, especially those who in America used to getting things done sometimes, and then those who are associated with it. But whenever I start to kind of wonder, I hear stories like that, like Brad's, and it's so moving. And it's something that in my life, I can't even imagine that level of forgiveness, that level of grappling with something, and to see just how he inspires people. And he does it in so many ways. I mean, it's the forgiveness, it's the hope, it's the charity, all of the above. And it's so beautiful to see even the daily tasks. I was talking to a sister who said that whenever she was kind of struggling to get motivated to finish a project or really put herself all in, she would think about him carrying Herb Miller and Herb saying, "Father, you got to put me down," and Father Capon replying, "But if I put you down, they'll shoot you. So I'm just gonna keep doing it." And I don't know, to see that motivation that he gives us, I think is really amazing.
This is something else that was recognized posthumously by the government, that he received the Medal of Honor, April 11th, 2013? It was awarded by President Obama,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah,
Yeah. And his nephew received it for him.
yeah. And the beautiful thing I think about that day, I wasn't able to be there. It was before I started this position, but is that I think 9 of the POWs were able to be there to see it. And it was long overdue. So many of them had said he needed it right away. But they were able to see that and see that recognition. And hopefully we probably won't make it all the way to Saint while they're still around, but we hope at least to make some progress and that let them know that the church is working on it. But yeah.
Well, by them telling this story, they have already done a tremendous service to all of us. This is, we need the witness of the saints. Pope St. John Paul was very much committed to helping to promote saints, including saints from our own time, so that the risk is to think that, well, saints and miracles are from a long time ago. And every so often, I'll get an email saying, well, why did the apostles do miracles and we don't have many more? So, well, actually, there still are quite a few miracles that are going on in the world. And the intercession of the saints is a very important part of that. He would be an example. And I don't think, people can always appreciate how PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, is very, very real. When a lot of the men that came back from World War II. There was no term, no idea what happened in the trauma of war. It was hard. And these guys just sort of slugged through. But it took, that post-Vietnam era, as well as a lot of sensitivity from the psychological community to recognize that. And healing of that is no small issue. The damage that the trauma of violence does to people is very real. And so, this is another area that is very important.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about us as Catholics is there's so many ways that can help. Obviously, psychology is a huge part of it, but so are the sacraments or the example of the saints, the intercession. And
Absolutely.
You can't have one without the other, I think. And I think it's good for us to recognize that, and hopefully, especially today on Veterans Day, to think about maybe if there's someone we know who's a veteran, just maybe to ask them how they're doing. And I know that it's not the same when probably someone who hasn't experienced that,
Right.
reaches out and asks someone if they can help. But at the same time, it's still a responsibility of ours, I think, to do.
Sure. And it's some, very important things, for being available. I think, one of the things President Trump has done very well is stepping up the care for veterans at the Veterans Administration. That was very important. And, he also helped in taking steps to promote normalization of relations between North and South Korea. Ways in which we can help veterans, but also the nicest thing would be that we don't need combat veterans because we reduce the violence in the first place. That would be an ideal.
Yeah.
There are times where we just have to step up to the battle. There's no doubt. But at the same time, we also have to deal with the ways we can bring peace, and that's most combat veterans would much prefer peace over war. They don't go blithely into battle and say, "Oh, it's okay, it'll be fun." No, this
Right.
this is hard, and so having intercessors for soldiers who would pray for peace is an extremely important thing, and that's where a saint like Father Capon
Yeah.
comes into play.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a line in the prayer for his canonization that prays for the Lord to show us his favor for Father Capon by signs of miracles and peace. So not just the miraculous signs, but that peace. And Father Capon, I think he viewed himself as a peacemaker. One of actually the only surviving audio that we have of him is a short clip of him giving us a radio address on the Beatitudes. And we have basically the Beatitudes of blessed are the peacemakers and blessed are the persecuted. And I think that's, again, one of those things where it's just too perfect to be true. It's not just a coincidence, and I think it's...
No.
Yeah.
This is where God's providence very much comes into play. And where was he on the radio, by the way?
That was in Japan. So there's the Chaplain's Hour. They had a daily snippet kind of the chaplain, guest chaplains coming on and giving a little address. And over the course of a few days, he covered the Beatitudes. And his preaching was very down to earth. It was very simple. He understood who he was talking to and just wanted to make it clear to them, to encourage them to live the virtues, to live the Beatitudes, and even back when he was at home, really to love the Eucharist, to encounter our Lord there. And one of the most powerful homilies that I have read of his is a homily that was addressed to soldiers at Harrington Air Base back before he became a full-time chaplain, and it was on the Good Shepherd. And in this homily, he talks about how important shepherds were in the land of Israel and what their duties were, taking care of the sheep. And he said they were willing to get up early in the morning before the sun rose to take care of their sheep. That's something that he did over in the prison camp. He would get up in the morning, melt snow, and present it to the men as coffee, just to cheer their spirits. So he would be up before all the men. In this homily, he says that the shepherds were humble men, but they couldn't be timid because they had to stand up for their sheep when they needed and to protect them from the enemies and the wolves. And he said, even at the risk of their own lives, offering their own lives. And he said that's what the Good Shepherd does for us. And so his encouragement was for the men to get to know that Good Shepherd, to get to know the Lord. But when I read that, I just thought, I was like, this is one of those homilies. It's not just something that he's talking about. This is coming from his heart. And I think it's so beautiful. That's how he modeled his life after the Good Shepherd.
Sure. We have another caller. Hello, Bob.
Yes,
Hi, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Arizona, but I reside in Kansas.
Uh-huh. And what is your question or comment?
Well, my question is, I understand that there's a certain number of miracles that have to be associated with an applicant for sainthood, and we're wondering where we stand with that.
Oh, okay. So what are some of the status of some of the miracles that would apply for the canonization?
So John Paul II did reduce the number. I think originally you had to have one for venerable as well. So there's 4 steps. There's servant of God, venerable, blessed, and saint.
Right.
And so venerable basically now is just us looking at the life and saying, looks like he lived a life of heroic virtue. He's someone who's worthy of heaven. But to get to that next step, that's where we ask, the Lord's kind of confirmation that he is a saint through the miracles. And so there's one needed for blessed and one needed for saint. Now, the way I understand it is the one for saint has to take place after he's named blessed, but I could be wrong there. We do have a few that have been told to us. Actually, we have several. We have all sorts of things from favors granted to the big kind of miraculous healings. And we've got 2 that are really under investigation. And the stories have been told in some of the books and stuff. The families have shared them. We're not able to go into a lot of detail, but I think you're probably familiar with one was the pole vaulter who had crashed into his head and wasn't expected to survive, was expected to be comatose basically the rest of his life, and through Father Capon's intercession made a pretty rapid recovery to this day. And then another was a young girl who had an autoimmune disease, and it was shutting down her organs, and family and parish prayed to Father Capon, and she bounced right back up. But one of my other favorite stories, which isn't super well known, actually happened several years ago. This was a man who was in the Army and actually ended up as a roommate of Father Capon down in Texas when he was at Fort Bliss. And his name's Osro Barkley, and he was dating a Catholic girl, Margaret, who he eventually married. And he said, well, I was thinking that maybe I should talk to a Catholic priest about this whole religion thing because I was pretty interested in Margaret, but by no means was I wanting to live with one. He said, but Father Capon won me over. He said, despite the fact that when I entered, there's this picture of the Virgin Mary, and I wasn't sure what I was getting into. He said, by the end of my time with him, he brought me into the church, he married us, and I would serve Mass for him when he was around the base. And Osro didn't end up getting sent over to Korea, thankfully. And after they heard about Father Capon's death in 1953, he and Margaret started praying to him, asking his intercession, because she was medically unable to have any children and had been to the doctor and said it's not possible. And after praying some time to Father Capon, they went in because she was feeling ill, and the doctor said, well, you're expecting, and it's a miracle baby. And they ended up having 3. And after the last one, they went back in and looked, and the doctor said, all of your children have been miracles, and there's no medical explanation. You shouldn't be able to conceive at all. And for whatever reason, that tends to be something that Father Capon is interested in helping people with, is conceive or continue to carry on difficult pregnancies. And we've had a number of people tell us that, and I don't know why they were moved to pray to him, but I think it's a beautiful thing. Obviously, the Holy Spirit. Yeah.
And it really is one of the odd things about the saints. You say, well, you can ask any of the saints to intercede for you, because that's what the saints do. They pray for us. They're in heaven. They see God face to face. They intercede for us. But some seem to have specialization. I know doctors specialize. And there's some saints who really are GPs, but general practitioners of prayer. But there's some saints who just specialize in certain things, and it's not always clear why, but they become patron saints of that. And again, not sure why. Like today's saint, Saint Martin of Tours, is obviously a patron saint for soldiers. He had been a soldier. He helped the poor, so he's one of the patron saints for people who are destitute. But he's also a patron saint for people who make wine. And I know the Baptists don't have those kind of patron saints, but we've got them. And I'm sure that a number of vintners just felt called to seek his intercession. Well, you know, Father Capon, who obviously was not ever married, didn't have any children, but obviously also had a father's heart.
Yeah.
You know, and that I'm sure that is where these prayers are being answered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm privileged to be good friends with Nick De La Sega, who's another one of the miracles, and we're the same age. And I didn't know him at the time the miracle took place, but he collapsed during a 5K race, and his heart stopped. And his cousin saw the people helping him and thought, "What can I do?" Well, I'm going to drop to my knees here on the pavement and pray to Father Capon. And they stuck Nick in the ambulance. His uncle was there, who's a doctor, and said, "I thought for sure he had the look of someone who was gone." Shut the doors, and the ambulance didn't go anywhere. Well, the EMT who was in there said that there was this jolt of electricity, and he turned around, and Nick was awake. And it's cool. We were able to have him.
But they didn't actually use a defibrillator.
No, they had tried a defibrillator before, so his heart was actually hooked up, and it was reading, but it wasn't being used. And it's a cool story. Part of our Capon's Men, we've been doing a podcast called The Foxhole with Father Capon, and there's a story, I think it's called like 9 Minutes, No Heartbeat, Nick sharing his story and the impact that it has on you. And that's the beautiful thing too, is to see the impact that it has on the families of those who he helps. And I know that there's probably just as many who he doesn't help necessarily with that miracle, but I hope that at least he gives them some comfort and reassurance.
Sure. Absolutely. Again, we want you to find out more about Father Capon by going to fathercapon.org. And it's, again, Father spelled out, Kapaun, Capon.org. You can also find out more what these Capon's Men are doing by going to Capon's Men, K-A-P-A-U-N-S, men.com. And you can go again to EWTNRC, get the book, The Miracle of Father Capon, Priest, Soldier, and Korean War Hero by Roy Wenzel and Travis Hagen. I read that, it's very good. And that's item 40653. I want to thank you for being with us. I appreciate it, Scott. And may the Lord bless all of you and all of our veterans especially. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And again, we want to thank you for all the help that you're giving us to keep going during this COVID crisis. We want to keep presenting to you prayer and the Mass and our teaching. So if you can, keep us in between your gas bill and electric bill and cable bill. And we will be able to pay all of our bills too, God willing. Thank you, and God bless.